The knee strike to Lieutenant Commander Vera Sinclair's skull was delivered with 187 pounds of force, enough pressure to fracture the C2 vertebra, enough impact to render most combat-trained soldiers unconscious, enough violence to end a career, though not in the way Captain Garrett Holt intended. No scream escaped her lips, no resistance, not a single sound that might give him satisfaction. When he finally released her, grinding his kneecap one last time against the base of her skull for emphasis, she rose in a single fluid motion. No hands for support, no stumbling, no weakness. She simply stood the way a statue might rise if gravity suddenly reversed itself. Then she dusted off her uniform with 2 precise pats. Left shoulder, right shoulder. Her movements carried the mechanical efficiency of a well-oiled machine performing routine maintenance. Then she looked at him. Her eyes were the color of the Atlantic in winter, gray-blue and utterly depthless. They held no anger, no pain, no fear. They held nothing at all, and that emptiness was more unnerving than any threat could ever be. "Is the demonstration complete, Captain?" Her voice was flat, professional, the tone a surgeon might use when asking for a scalpel. 72 hours later, Garrett Holt would be begging for a medical discharge. His career wouldn't just end. It would be erased the way fire erases paper, leaving nothing but ash and the memory of something that once existed. This is how it happened. 72 hours earlier, the Joint Urban Warfare Training Center at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, sprawled across 200 acres of carefully orchestrated chaos. Kill houses stood like brutal concrete monuments to the art of close-quarters violence. Shooting ranges stretched toward distant tree lines. Obstacle courses twisted through mud and wire like intestines pulled from the earth itself. It was a place designed to transform soldiers into something harder, something sharper, something more lethal. September in North Carolina meant heat that pressed down on you like a wet blanket soaked in fire. The kind of heat that made breathing feel like drinking hot soup. The kind that separated the serious from the pretenders before training even began. On a Tuesday morning, as the Carolina sun burned through the last traces of dawn mist, a woman arrived at the main gate. She drove a rental sedan that had seen better decades. The kind of anonymous vehicle that nobody remembers seeing. The kind that disappears into parking lots and memories with equal ease. She wore civilian clothes, jeans faded at the knees, a plain gray t-shirt that hung loose on her frame. At 41 years old, she could have passed for a decade younger, the kind of fitness that came from 2 decades of operations that would have killed lesser soldiers. Running shoes that had logged serious miles across terrain that would break most hiking boots. Her hair caught the morning light, dark red with copper highlights that seemed to hold fire within them. She had pulled it back in a simple ponytail, practical, unassuming, forgettable. She showed her military ID to the gate guard, a young private who barely glanced at it before waving her through. He failed to notice the absence of any unit designation on her orders. He missed the unusual security clearance level that would have made his commanding officer's eyes widen. He noticed only that she was a woman, alone, driving toward a training facility where women were rare and often unwelcome. He certainly failed to recognize that she moved with the contained stillness of a predator in unfamiliar territory. He could not see that her eyes swept the facility with the systematic precision of someone conducting a tactical assessment, cataloging entry points, exit routes, fields of fire, blind spots. He did not observe that her hands, resting loosely on the steering wheel, bore the calluses of someone who had spent years gripping rifles until they became extensions of her own skeleton. Lieutenant Commander Vera Sinclair parked in the designated visitor lot. She killed the engine and sat for exactly 30 seconds in absolute stillness. She was breathing in a specific pattern. 4 seconds in through the nose, 4 seconds held, 4 seconds out through the mouth, 4 seconds held. the combat breathing technique that had kept her alive through 11 deployments in situations that would have broken most operators before they had even processed what was happening. In her right hand, she held a photograph. The edges were worn soft from handling, the corners rounded by years of being pulled from pockets and pressed between fingers. The image itself had faded slightly, but the faces remained clear. Two women in desert camouflage, rifles slung across their backs, arms around each other's shoulders. Both were grinning despite the visible exhaustion carved into their features. Behind them, the bombed-out skeleton of a building in Fallujah stood testament to the chaos they had survived together. The woman on the left was Vera, 18 years younger than she was now, her face not yet marked by the pale scar that now traced a line from her left shoulder blade to her collarbone, a gift from a Taliban blade that had come within half an inch of her subclavian artery. Back then, she had been 23 years old, a junior officer on her second deployment, still learning what it meant to be a warrior, still believing that skill and courage were enough to keep the people you loved alive. The woman on the right was Lieutenant Claire Ashford, blonde hair escaping from beneath her helmet. Bright smile that seemed impossible given their circumstances, eyes that held both kindness and an edge sharp enough to cut through steel. Claire Ashford had been dead for 15 years, a bullet through the throat during a building clearance in Ramadi in 2009. She had bled out in 43 seconds while Vera held pressure on the wound and screamed for a medic who could not reach them through the firefight. 43 seconds. That is how long it takes for a life to drain away, for a smile to fade forever, for a promise to be born from blood and desperate prayers. Vera had made that promise while Claire's blood soaked through her gloves, and her friend's eyes went from frightened to peaceful to empty. She had kept that promise for 15 years. She was here to finish keeping it. Vera placed the photograph in the center console, face down. She did not need to look at it anymore. The image was carved into her memory with the permanence of scar tissue. Some wounds heal. Some become part of you forever. She stepped out of the car, 3 floors above the main gate, in an observation booth that overlooked the entire facility. Colonel Warren Drake stood with his arms crossed and his eyes fixed on a monitor. The screen displayed the parking lot camera feed. He watched the woman park her rental car, watched her sit in that precise stillness for 30 seconds, watched her breathing pattern through the subtle rise and fall of her shoulders, watched the way she handled herself when she finally emerged. And he knew, with the certainty that comes from 3 decades of watching warriors prepare for battle, he knew exactly what she was. Colonel Warren Drake had joined the Marine Corps in 1983, when the Cold War was still cold and the Soviet Union was still a superpower that made strategists lose sleep at night. He had served with Force Recon during the First Gulf War in 1991, running reconnaissance missions deep in Iraqi territory, living on adrenaline and bad coffee while laser-guided bombs turned the night sky into something from a science fiction film. He had been in Mogadishu in 1993, October 3rd and 4th, the Battle of the Black Sea. Though his unit's role remained classified even now, he had seen what happened when poor leadership met overwhelming enemy force. He had watched men die because their commanders had prioritized political optics over tactical reality. He had carried bodies through streets that ran with blood while RPGs screamed overhead and the city burned around them. He had sworn an oath that day, standing over the flag-draped coffins of men who should have lived, men who died because someone in charge cared more about their career than their soldiers. He swore he would never let that happen again, not on his watch, not ever. Now, at 62 years old, with iron-gray hair cropped close to his skull and a face that looked like it had been carved from desert sandstone by wind and hard experience, he commanded this training facility. His job was to produce the finest close-quarters combat specialists in the world. His job was also to identify instructors who confuse toughness with cruelty, who used their authority to break soldiers rather than build them. 3 weeks ago, an encrypted message had arrived through channels so classified that only 4 people in the entire military had the clearance to read it. The message was from Joint Special Operations Command. It was brief. It was specific. It changed everything. DevGru operator arriving for assessment. Cover role as standard Navy participant. Do not reveal identity. Do not intervene except in case of life-threatening situation. Document all interactions. Report directly to JSOC. Drake had agreed immediately. He had been hearing rumors about Captain Garrett Holt for years. Complaints that never quite rose to the level of official reports. Students who had graduated but carried injuries that hindered their later performance. A culture of intimidation wrapped in the language of tradition. Whispers in hallways. Nervous glances when Holt's name was mentioned. The particular silence that falls over a room when someone wants to speak but fears the consequences. But rumors were not evidence. And in the military, you could not remove an instructor based on whispers. You needed documentation. You needed witnesses. You needed proof so undeniable that even the most dedicated apologists could not explain it away. So JSOC had sent someone to draw out the truth. Someone who could endure whatever Holt dished out and survive long enough to document it. Someone whose presence would make Holt reveal his true nature because he would not be able to resist the target. They had sent a sheepdog disguised as a sheep, and Drake was here to make sure the experiment ran its course. He pulled out a secure tablet and typed a brief message. Subject arrived. Protocol active. Will maintain observation. The reply came back in seconds. Confirmed. She's one of our best. Whatever she endures, she does so voluntarily. Your job is to watch and record. Do not interfere unless absolutely necessary. Drake locked the tablet and returned his attention to the monitor. The woman had emerged from the administrative building and was walking toward the barracks. Her stride was measured, unhurried. She did not look around like a tourist taking in new surroundings. She navigated with the confidence of someone who had spent years operating in unfamiliar territory. Colonel? A young lieutenant appeared at his elbow. Lieutenant Harris, fresh-faced and eager. The kind of officer who still believed the system always worked the way it was supposed to. The training roster is confirmed for tomorrow. 12 Rangers plus the Navy participant. Captain Holt wants to begin with physical assessment, then move to live-fire drills. Understood. Drake kept his eyes on the screen. Make sure all observation cameras are operational. I want every training session recorded from multiple angles. Sir, that's standard practice anyway. I know it's standard, Lieutenant. Drake turned to face him. His expression carried the weight of 30 years of hard lessons. I'm saying I want you to personally verify every camera is working. Check the backup systems. I want redundancy. I want coverage that would survive a direct hit. Do you understand? Harris looked puzzled, but nodded. Yes, sir. Is there a particular reason for the extra scrutiny? Just being thorough, Lieutenant. Drake's tone made it clear the conversation was over. Harris saluted and left. Drake remained at his post, watching the monitor until Vera Sinclair disappeared into the barracks building. Then he pulled up Captain Garrett Holt's personnel file on his tablet. The official record looked impressive. Multiple combat deployments to Iraq and Afghanistan, Ranger qualified, excellent marks from previous training assignments, letters of commendation from superior officers. On paper, Holt was exactly the kind of hard-charging infantry officer the Army needed. But Drake had been reading personnel files for 3 decades. He knew how to spot the gaps between the official narrative and the truth. Holt had applied for SEAL training twice, 1996 and 1998, failed both times. The roots of that failure went back further, to 1991, to the sands of Kuwait during Operation Desert Storm. Holt had been a young infantry sergeant then, 23 years old, eager, ambitious, certain that he was destined for greatness. His unit had been tasked with securing an oil facility. Standard mission, low risk. the kind of operation that should have been routine. But nothing in war is routine. They had been pinned down for 6 hours, taking fire from positions they could not identify, losing men to an enemy they could not see. And then the SEALs had arrived, a 6-man team that moved through the chaos like ghosts. They had neutralized the enemy positions in 12 minutes. 12 minutes to accomplish what Holt's entire company could not do in 6 hours. He had watched them work, watched their precision, their confidence, their absolute mastery of violence. And something had broken inside him, not his courage, not his determination, his sense of self. He had applied for SEAL training 5 years later, determined to become one of them, to prove that he belonged among the elite. He had failed, not because he lacked physical ability. The man was a specimen, 6'2", 210 pounds of muscle and determination. He had failed because of the psychological evaluation. The notes were diplomatic but clear. Candidate demonstrates difficulty accepting constructive criticism, shows tendency toward aggressive responses when challenged, recommend additional maturity before reapplication. He had tried again in 1998, failed again. The same evaluation, the same words, the same verdict. Not good enough. 26 years had passed since then. Holt never reapplied. Instead, he had remained in the Army, moved into training roles, built a reputation as a demanding instructor who pushed students to their limits. Some called him tough, but fair. Others used different words in private. And now he was about to spend 3 days training someone who had succeeded where he had failed, someone who wore the SEAL trident on her dress uniform, someone who had earned the Navy Cross for actions so classified that even Drake, with his considerable security clearance, could not access the full details. Holt did not know who Vera Sinclair really was. He saw only a woman, a small woman, an outsider from a service branch he considered inferior to his beloved Rangers. He would see a target for all his accumulated frustration and insecurity. Drake closed the file. Tomorrow morning would be interesting. He had been in the military long enough to recognize when two opposing forces were about to collide. The only question was which one would survive the impact. The barracks room assigned to Vera Sinclair was Spartan, even by military standards. A single bed with a mattress thin enough to count the springs. A metal locker that had been painted and repainted so many times the corners were rounded with accumulated layers. A desk and chair that might have been manufactured during the Korean War. A small window that looked out over the obstacle course. The walls were cinder block painted institutional white. The floor was concrete covered with linoleum that had been scuffed by generations of boots. She set her duffel on the bed and began the ritual of unpacking her gear. Everything had its place. Everything was arranged for maximum efficiency. Her plate carrier hung on a wall hook where she could reach it in darkness, customized over years of hard use until it fit her body like a second skin. Her rifle, a Heckler & Koch .416 that she had personally zeroed on 3 different continents, was laid out on the desk for cleaning and inspection. Every scratch on its surface told a story. Every worn edge marked a mission completed. Magazines were stacked in precise rows, springs compressed just enough to maintain tension without causing fatigue. Her combat knife, a Benchmade Nimravus with a blackened blade, rested in its sheath. She had carried this knife through 11 deployments. It had saved her life twice, taken lives more times than she cared to count. This was the liturgy of the warrior, the ceremonial preparation that transformed equipment into extensions of the body. Vera had performed these rituals in forward operating bases in Afghanistan, in safe houses in Iraq, in training facilities across 3 continents, in places whose names were redacted from official records. The locations changed. The ritual remained constant. When her gear was arranged to satisfaction, she sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself 5 minutes of stillness. 5 minutes to feel the dull ache in her muscles from the long drive. 5 minutes to acknowledge the weight of what she was about to do. She was volunteering to be abused. That was the stark reality beneath all the tactical language and official justification. She was going to endure whatever Captain Garrett Holt chose to inflict, because that was the only way to document his behavior in a manner that would hold up to scrutiny. Video evidence, witness testimony, medical records if necessary, building a case brick by brick. Most people would ask why. Why was she willing to suffer for a cause that would not directly benefit her? She already had her SEAL trident. She had already proven herself in combat more times than she could count. At 41 years old, with 20 years of service behind her, she did not need to prove anything to anyone. But that was exactly the point. She was not doing this for herself. She was doing it for the young women who would come after her, the ones who would face instructors like Holt and would not have the experience or the rank or the combat record to protect themselves. The ones who might endure the abuse and say nothing because they believed it was just part of the process. The ones who might develop chronic injuries that would get them killed years later in situations they should have survived. She was doing it for Claire Ashford, who died with Vera's hands pressed against her throat, who spent her last 43 seconds trying to tell Vera something, whose final word was her daughter's name, Lily. 6 years old when her mother died, Vera had gone to that funeral, had held that little girl while she sobbed and asked questions that had no good answers. Where's Mommy? Why isn't Mommy coming home? Did Mommy do something wrong? Vera had made a promise that day, standing beside a flag-draped coffin, holding a child who would grow up without her mother, surrounded by warriors who wept without shame. She promised that Claire's death would mean something. She promised that she would find out why Claire had hesitated in that doorway for 0.4 of a second. She promised that when she found the reason, she would make sure it never happened to anyone else. It had taken years. Years of digging through old training records, years of whispered conversations with soldiers who had served under the same instructors, years of piecing together fragments of truth from people who were too afraid to speak openly. But she had found the answer. Claire Ashford had hesitated because chronic back pain had sent a warning spike through her nervous system at the critical moment. 0.4 of a second. That is all it took. In that 0.4 of a second, the enemy combatant had acquired his target. The chronic back pain had a source. His name was Garrett Holt. He had been Claire's instructor at Ranger School in 2007. He had believed that breaking students physically was the path to making them stronger. He had believed that women in combat roles needed to be pushed twice as hard to prove they deserved to be there. He had believed a lot of things that had nothing to do with training and everything to do with his own failures, his own humiliation in the sands of Kuwait, his own rejection from the brotherhood he desperately wanted to join. Claire had never filed a complaint. She had endured. She had graduated. She had gone on to become one of the finest combat leaders Vera had ever served with. And then she had died because her body, remembering old pain, had betrayed her for 0.4 of a second. Vera pulled the photograph from her pocket. 2 young women in the desert, arms around each other, grinning at the camera like death was something that happened to other people. "I'm here, Claire." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I found him, and in 72 hours he's going to learn what it means to face someone who can't be broken." She placed the photograph on the desk, propped it against the wall where she could see it, a reminder, a talisman, a promise written in blood and kept in silence for 15 years. In a small house in Virginia, 800 miles from Fort Bragg, a young woman named Lily Ashford sat at her kitchen table. She was 21 years old now, blonde like her mother, with eyes that held the same impossible combination of kindness and steel. On the table in front of her sat an acceptance letter. She had read it 17 times. The words had not changed. "Dear Miss Ashford, we are pleased to inform you that your application to basic underwater demolition, SEAL training has been accepted. BUD-S, the most brutal military training program in the world. the same program her mother had dreamed of attending before circumstances and timing and a war that needed fighters had sent her down a different path. Lily had few memories of her mother. Fragments, impressions, the ghost of a laugh that echoed in dreams she could not quite hold on to when she woke. But she remembered Vera Sinclair, Aunt Vera, though they were not related by blood. Vera who came to every birthday, every graduation, every important moment in Lily's life. Vera who never talked about how Claire died, but whose eyes went somewhere far away whenever Lily asked about her mother's last days. Vera, who had called 3 days ago with a strange tone in her voice. "I'm going to be out of contact for a while," she had said. "Maybe a week. There's something I need to finish." "Is everything okay?" A pause. Then Vera's voice, soft but certain. "It will be. After this, it will be." Lily had not understood, but she had heard something in Vera's voice that she had never heard before. Peace. The kind of peace that comes when you are finally about to complete something you have been carrying for a very long time. She looked at the acceptance letter again. Then she looked at the photograph that had sat on her desk for as long as she could remember. 2 women in the desert, arms around each other, grinning at the camera. "I'm going to make you proud, Mom." Her voice was steady despite the tears forming in her eyes. "Both of you." The sun set over Fort Bragg, painting the kill houses in shades of orange and shadow. In her barracks room, Vera Sinclair lay on the thin mattress with her boots still on. The way she had learned to sleep in combat zones where seconds could mean the difference between life and death. Her breathing remained slow and measured, even as she drifted toward sleep. Tomorrow the test would begin, but tonight she rested. Because warriors understand that rest is a weapon too, and you do not go into battle exhausted unless you have absolutely no other choice. In the observation booth above, Colonel Drake watched the facility settle into night. His tablet showed the encrypted conversation with Jayasok. His mind replayed the image of the woman walking toward the barracks with the measured stride of someone who knew exactly what they were walking into. In his quarters across the facility, Captain Garrett Holt was reviewing the roster for tomorrow's training. His eyes lingered on one name, Lieutenant Commander V. Sinclair, Navy. He smiled. He had plans for the Navy's contribution to his course. He had no idea that the Navy's contribution had plans of her own. Dawn came to Fort Bragg at 5:45, painting the eastern sky in shades of amber and blood orange. Vera Sinclair was already awake, already dressed in her training fatigues, already lacing her boots with the methodical precision of someone performing a ritual they had completed thousands of times. She had been awake since 0400, a habit carved into her circadian rhythm by years of pre-dawn operations. Her body knew that the hours before sunrise were when violence most often came calling. She arrived at the training area at OR 550, 10 minutes early. The concrete pad stretched before her like a stage, awaiting its performers. Kill house structures loomed in the background, their facades pockmarked with years of simulated combat. 12 men were already present, clustered in loose groups of 2 or 3, Army Rangers, their unit patches visible on their shoulders. They ranged in age from mid-20s to late 30s, all bearing the weathered confidence of soldiers who had seen combat and survived to tell the tale. Their conversation died as Vera approached. 12 pairs of eyes tracked her movement across the concrete. She did not acknowledge the stares. She simply found a space at the edge of the formation and began her warm-up routine. Arm circles, leg swings, dynamic stretches that kept her muscles loose and ready. She had learned long ago that the body was a machine that required proper preparation. Cold muscles were how operators ended up injured before the real work even began. Well, well. The voice cut through the morning air with the false joviality of a predator who had just spotted prey. "Look what the Navy dragged in." Captain Garrett Holt strode onto the training pad like a man who owned not just the space, but everyone standing on it. He was everything his personnel file suggested. 6'2", 210 pounds of muscle and attitude, blonde hair cropped in a high and tight that made his head look like a battering ram. His face was broad and already reddening from the morning heat, and his eyes held the particular gleam of someone who enjoyed their authority far too much. Behind him walked 2 assistant instructors, both sergeants who had clearly learned that their job was to laugh at Holt's jokes and nod at his proclamations. They took up positions flanking him, creating a triangle of authority that faced the assembled students. "Gentlemen," Holt's voice boomed across the training area. "Welcome to Week 2 of the Advanced CQB course. For those of you who survived Week 1, congratulations. You've proven you can handle the basics." He paused for effect. "This week, we separate the warriors from the tourists." His eyes found Vera and stayed there. "And speaking of tourists, it appears the Navy has decided to join us. How generous of them to send their very best." A few of the Rangers chuckled, nervous laughter, the kind that comes from men who are not sure if they are supposed to find something funny but know that their instructor expects it. Vera maintained her stretching routine. Her face showed nothing, no irritation, no embarrassment, no acknowledgement that she had even heard the comment. This was the first test, and it had nothing to do with physical ability. It was about whether she could be provoked into an emotional response. Holt's smile faltered slightly at her lack of reaction. He had been expecting something: anger, defensiveness, even a forced smile that he could interpret as weakness. The complete absence of any response was somehow more frustrating than resistance would have been. "Line up," he barked. "Height order. Tallest to shortest. Let's see what we're working with." The soldiers arranged themselves quickly, muscle memory taking over. Vera ended up at the far right of the formation, the shortest person present by 3 inches. It was a deliberate arrangement, and everyone knew it. The message was clear: you do not belong here, and even your body knows it. From his vantage point in the observation booth 3 stories above, Colonel Drake watched through the tinted glass. His face was impassive, but his hands gripped the railing with enough force to turn his knuckles white. Next to him, Lieutenant Harris stood with a tablet ready to take notes. "Recording?" Drake asked. "Yes, sir. All 6 cameras operational. Audio is clear." "Good." Drake's voice was steady. His eyes never left the training pad below. "I want every word documented." The test had begun. Vera stood in formation as Captain Holt delivered his opening monologue. It was a speech he had clearly given many times, refined through repetition until it flowed with practiced ease. "Close quarters battle," he said, pacing in front of the formation like a preacher before his congregation, "is the most intimate form of warfare." His boots struck the concrete in measured rhythm. You're not launching missiles from ships. You're not calling in airstrikes from a comfortable distance. You're face to face with the enemy, close enough to smell their last meal, close enough to see the fear in their eyes when they realize they're about to die. He stopped pacing, turned to face them directly. "This week, I'm going to push you harder than you've ever been pushed. I'm going to put you in situations that simulate real combat stress. Some of you will rise to the challenge." His eyes found Vera again. "Some of you will wash out, and that's fine. Better to discover your limits here, where the bullets are fake, than downrange where they're very, very real." His smile sharpened. "Of course, some of you might be wondering why we're wasting valuable training time on someone who will never see real combat. After all, the Navy's idea of close-quarters battle is probably deciding which fork to use at the officer's mess." More laughter from the Rangers, louder this time, because Holt had given them explicit permission. Vera continued staring straight ahead. Her breathing remained controlled. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out, 4 seconds hold. "But I believe in equal opportunity," Holt continued, his voice dripping with false magnanimity. "If the Navy wants to send someone to learn how real warriors operate, who am I to deny them?" He pointed to a pull-up bar mounted between two posts at the edge of the training pad. Max effort pull-ups, dead hang, chin over bar, full extension at the bottom. We'll go in reverse order. He smiled at Vera with teeth that seemed too white for his weathered face. Ladies first. The other rangers shifted uncomfortably. This was not standard protocol. Usually, physical assessments happened alphabetically or by volunteer, but no one was going to challenge the instructor on day one. Vera walked to the pull-up bar without hesitation. She reached up, gripped the cold metal, and hung for a moment with her full weight suspended. Her frame looked small beneath the bar, almost childlike compared to the men who would follow her. Then she began. The first 10 came smooth and controlled, chin clearing the bar by 2 inches, arms extending fully at the bottom, no kipping, no momentum, just pure strength pulled from muscles that had been forged through years of training that made this course look like a vacation. At 15, some of the rangers began to pay closer attention. At 20, they had stopped their side conversations entirely. At 25, even Holt's smirk had faded into something more focused. Vera did not stop at 25. She continued with the same mechanical precision, her breathing still controlled, her form still perfect. 30, 35, 40. The only sign of strain was a slight tremor in her forearms and the sheen of sweat forming on her forehead. At 50, she dropped from the bar and stood at attention. Her chest rose and fell more rapidly now, but she was not gasping. She was not bent over. She simply stood there waiting for the next instruction, as if completing 50 perfect pull-ups was as routine as brushing her teeth. The silence on the training pad was absolute. 50 pull-ups was exceptional by any standard. The Army Ranger physical fitness test required 19 for a perfect score. Vera had just done nearly 3 times that number without apparent difficulty. Holt's face had gone from red to a deeper shade of crimson. He had meant to embarrass her, to establish dominance by making her fail at the first task. Instead, she had just demonstrated a level of physical capability that exceeded most of the men present. "Not bad," he said finally. His voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a man recalculating his approach. For someone who spends most of their time on a boat. He stepped closer. Close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath, the aftershave that was too strong for the Carolina heat. "Let's see how you do with something that actually matters." And in that moment, watching from the observation booth above, Colonel Warren Drake knew exactly what was coming. The next 72 hours would be war. A war that only one of them could win. And despite everything he had seen in 30 years of service, despite Mogadishu and the Gulf and all the battles in between, he found himself genuinely uncertain about the outcome. But he had his suspicions, and for the first time in a very long time, he found himself hoping he was right. The sun climbed higher over Fort Bragg. The heat intensified. And in the spaces between orders and exercises and the casual cruelties of a man who could not accept his own failures, Vera Sinclair endured. She endured because that is what warriors do. She endured because somewhere in Virginia, a 21-year-old woman was preparing to follow in her mother's footsteps. She endured because 15 years ago, she had made a promise in blood, and in 48 hours, she would finish keeping it. She looked toward the barracks where Claire's photograph waited on her desk. "Almost there," she whispered, too quiet for anyone to hear. "Almost there, Claire." The morning light caught the copper in her hair, and her eyes, gray-blue like the winter Atlantic, held nothing but patience. The patience of a predator who knows that time is on her side. The patience of a woman who has already decided how this story ends. The second day began before the sun. Vera Sinclair woke at 400 to the sound of her own heartbeat, steady, controlled, the rhythm of a machine that had been calibrated through years of discipline to perform regardless of circumstances. She lay still for 30 seconds, listening, processing. The barracks creaked with the settling of old wood. Somewhere outside, a generator hummed its constant mechanical prayer. The air smelled of concrete and gun oil, and the particular staleness that accumulated in buildings designed for function rather than comfort. She rose without ceremony. Her body protested the movement. The previous day's training had left its marks, muscle fatigue that whispered warnings with every motion, the beginning of bruises that would bloom into purple and yellow by nightfall. But pain was information, and information was power. She dressed in the darkness, her fingers finding each piece of clothing by memory, fatigues pressed and ready, boots positioned exactly where she had left them, every item in its place because chaos in small things led to chaos in large things, and chaos got operators killed. By 0500, she was completing her second mile around the perimeter road. The Carolina air hung thick and wet, the kind of humidity that made breathing feel like drowning in slow motion. Her feet struck the pavement in steady rhythm, her arms pumped at her sides. Her mind cataloged the day ahead with clinical precision. Day 2. 48 hours remaining. Today would be worse than yesterday. She knew this with certainty, because men like Garrett Holt followed predictable patterns. When their first attempt at dominance failed, they escalated. When a target refused to break, they applied more pressure. When their superiority was challenged, they responded with violence wrapped in the language of training. Vera had seen it before. In the mountains of Afghanistan, where warlords mistook cruelty for strength. In the streets of Ramadi, where insurgents believed that brutality would break American resolve. In training facilities across the world, where small men with small power wielded it against those they perceived as weaker. They were always wrong, and they never learned until it was too late. She completed her run as the first light touched the eastern horizon. The sky shifted from black to purple to the amber glow of approaching dawn. In her barracks room, she stripped off her sweat-soaked shirt and examined herself in the small mirror. The bruises were developing as expected. Yellow shadows on her ribs from an accidental collision during yesterday's obstacle course. Accidental in the official sense. Deliberate in the way that only someone who had experienced it could recognize. A scrape on her left forearm from the rope climb. The kind of injury that happened when someone cut your descent short by releasing the tension at the wrong moment. Small injuries, calculated injuries, the kind that accumulated into larger patterns. She photographed each one with the secure device hidden in her gear. Timestamp, location, context. Building the evidence file that would eventually end Garrett Holt's career. Then she dressed for war, because that is what this was. A war fought with paperwork and patience instead of bullets and bombs, but a war nonetheless. The training pad was already crowded when she arrived at 545. The 12 Rangers had formed their usual clusters, their conversations quieter today, their glances toward Vera more frequent and more thoughtful. Yesterday's 50 pull-ups had changed something, not everything, but something. Staff Sergeant Derek Holloway stood apart from the others, 34 years old, 6 deployments split between Iraq and Afghanistan. The weathered look of someone who had spent too many years in places where the sun tried to kill you and the people tried harder. His eyes tracked Vera as she took her position at the edge of the formation. He had seen something yesterday, something that did not match the cover story, something that whispered of capabilities far beyond what a standard Navy officer should possess. He had worked alongside SEAL teams during joint operations in Kandahar, seen how they moved, how they processed information, how they carried themselves with a particular kind of stillness that came from absolute confidence in their own lethality. This woman moved the same way, and that raised questions he was not sure he wanted answered. Captain Garrett Holt arrived at 600 precisely. His face was composed today, the frustration from yesterday hidden beneath a mask of professional detachment, but his eyes told a different story. They found Vera immediately. And they held the particular gleam of a man who had spent the night planning. "Good morning, gentlemen." His voice carried across the training pad with practiced authority. Yesterday was the warm-up. Today we begin the real work. He held up a training schedule. Individual assessment day. Each of you will rotate through 5 stations: physical conditioning, weapons proficiency, tactical problem solving, stress inoculation, and close quarters combat. He paused. The standards are the same for everyone. His eyes found Vera. Well, almost everyone. The smile that crossed his face was the smile of a cat who had cornered a mouse. Lieutenant Commander Sinclair, since you demonstrated such impressive physical capabilities yesterday, I've decided to give you the opportunity to really shine. He gestured to his assistant instructor. Sergeant Mills will be providing you with modified equipment for today's exercises, heavier loads, longer distances, the kind of challenge that someone of your obvious caliber deserves. The sarcasm dripped from every word, but beneath the sarcasm was something else, a trap being set with careful precision. Vera maintained her position. Her face showed nothing. Understood, Captain. 3 words, flat, professional, empty of any emotion that could be weaponized against her. Holt's smile flickered. He had wanted more. A protest, a complaint, something he could use to justify what he had planned. But she gave him nothing, and so he had to proceed without justification. The morning unfolded exactly as Vera had predicted. Station 1, physical conditioning. The standard load for the obstacle course was 60 pounds of gear and equipment. Vera was issued 90. The additional weight distributed across her pack in a way designed to unbalance her center of gravity. She completed the course in the top 3 times, regardless. Station 2, weapons proficiency. The standard rifle qualification used stationary targets at known distances. Vera's targets were set in motion, random patterns, variable speeds, the kind of challenge typically reserved for advanced sniper training. She scored 97%, missing only 1 target that had malfunctioned and stopped moving unexpectedly. Station 3, tactical problem solving. The standard exercise involved a simulated hostage scenario with clear right and wrong answers. Vera's scenario was modified with contradictory intelligence, time pressure, and moral ambiguities that had no clean solutions. She navigated it with the cold efficiency of someone who had made life-and-death decisions under far worse circumstances. By midday, Holt's frustration had become visible. His face reddened with each station Vera completed. His instructions grew sharper. His modifications to her exercises grew more extreme. And still she remained unbroken. Still she offered no complaint. Still she denied him the reaction he craved. During the water break, Staff Sergeant Holloway positioned himself near Vera at the hydration station. His movements were casual. His voice was not. "Ma'am." He filled his canteen without looking at her. "You don't have to prove anything to these people." Vera drank in measured sips, 4 ounces at a time, enough to hydrate without creating digestive distress during the afternoon sessions. "I'm not trying to prove anything, Sergeant. I'm just here to train." "With respect, ma'am, that's not what I'm seeing." Holloway's voice dropped lower. "I've worked with SEALs before, joint operations in Kandahar. I know the difference between regular Navy and special operations." He paused. "And I know when an instructor is targeting someone for personal reasons rather than professional ones." Now Vera did glance at him. Just briefly. Just long enough to assess whether this was genuine concern or a test designed by Holt to draw out information. She saw only sincerity in his expression. Sincerity and the particular anger of someone who had witnessed injustice before and had not liked it then either. "I appreciate your observation, Sergeant." Her voice remained level. "But I can handle Captain Holt." "I don't doubt that, ma'am. I'm just saying if things escalate further, there are people here who will back your testimony." He capped his canteen. "You don't have to endure abuse in silence." Vera turned to face him fully. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. but it carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Not yet, Sergeant, but thank you." Before Holloway could respond, Holt's voice cut across the training area. "Water break is over. Back to work." His eyes found Vera and Holloway standing together, and something dark flickered across his face. "Holloway, since you're so interested in chatting with our Navy princess, you can partner with her for the afternoon's hand-to-hand session." He smiled. "Let's see if she can handle a real opponent." The afternoon session focused on combatives, the Army's term for hand-to-hand combat training. Students paired off on foam mats spread across the concrete, practicing takedowns and submission holds under Holt's supervision. Holloway and Vera faced each other on their assigned mat. He was 8 inches taller and 70 pounds heavier. The size disparity was obvious to everyone watching. "Don't go easy on her, Holloway." Holt circled their mat like a shark that had scented blood in the water. "She wants to play with the big boys. She needs to learn how the big boys play." Holloway's expression was uncomfortable. "Ma'am, I'm going to follow the instructor's guidance, but I'll try to—" "It's fine, Sergeant." Vera's voice cut through his hesitation. "Use your full strength. I need the practice." They began. Holloway came in for a standard collar tie, the opening move for most wrestling exchanges. Vera slipped it smoothly. Transitioning to an arm drag that would have taken Holloway to the ground if he had not been expecting resistance. They reset. Went again. For 20 minutes, they worked through various scenarios. Each time, Vera demonstrated a level of technical skill that clearly surprised Holloway. She was not overpowering him with strength. She was using leverage, timing, and technique to compensate for the size difference. It was the kind of refined skill that came from years of grappling with opponents who were bigger, stronger, and trying very hard to hurt you. Holt watched with increasing irritation. This was not going the way he had planned. Vera was supposed to be getting dominated, embarrassed, made to feel inadequate. Instead, she was holding her own against a decorated ranger with significant combat experience. "Hold up!" Holt's command stopped the training. All eyes turned to him. "I don't think we're creating enough realism here. Holloway, you're being too gentle. In real combat, the enemy isn't going to worry about hurting you." He stepped onto the mat. "Let me demonstrate the proper intensity." The observation booth fell silent. Colonel Drake leaned forward. His hands gripped the railing until his knuckles went white. "Lieutenant Harris." His voice was quiet, controlled, the voice of a man who had learned to master his emotions in situations far worse than this. "Make sure you're getting every angle." "Yes, sir. All cameras recording." On the mat below, Holt positioned himself behind Vera. "This is a standard rear takedown scenario." His voice was calm, professional, the voice of an instructor explaining a technique. But his eyes held something else entirely. "Your opponent has achieved back control. Most people panic. They try to turn into the attacker, which is exactly wrong." He wrapped his right arm around Vera's neck. "Let me show you what happens when you make that mistake." The chokehold he applied was wrong. Not a proper blood choke that would render someone unconscious safely, but a trachea-crushing grip that restricted air rather than blood flow. Vera's training told her immediately what was happening. Holt either did not know what he was doing, or he did not care. Her hands came up instinctively to relieve the pressure. "See how she's fighting?" Holt's voice remained conversational, as if he were discussing the weather rather than slowly strangling a fellow officer. "That's wasted energy. In a real situation, you need to accept the dominant position and work from there." He increased the pressure. Vera's face began to redden. Her fingers clawed at his forearm, but he was too strong, his grip too tight. The other rangers shifted uncomfortably. This had crossed the line from demonstration to something darker. Then Holt swept her legs and drove her face first into the mat. Her body hit with a sound like meat slapping against a butcher's block. Before she could recover, Holt dropped his full weight onto her back, driving his right knee into the base of her skull. 187 pounds of force, concentrated on the most vulnerable part of the cervical spine. Vera's vision exploded into white. The pain was immense, crushing. The C2 vertebra screamed warnings that her conscious mind could not process. If it snapped, she would be paralyzed from the neck down. If it displaced, she could die before anyone could reach her. The danger was immediate, and it was real. A scream built in her throat but found no exit. The angle of her neck and the crushing weight had sealed her airway. Breathing was impossible. Movement was impossible. Only endurance remained. 8 seconds that stretched into eternity. This is how you neutralize a threat. Holt's voice was calm, professional, as if he were not currently committing assault. Complete domination of position. They can't move, can't breathe, can't resist. This is the reality of close-quarters combat. He ground his knee one final time against her skull, a gratuitous twist of cruelty that had nothing to do with demonstration and everything to do with establishing dominance. Then he stood. Releasing her with theatrical casualness, Vera lay motionless, 3 seconds. The watching Rangers held their collective breath. Holloway had started forward, his face a mask of outrage. But one of Holt's assistant instructors blocked his path with a subtle shake of the head. Don't make it worse. Inside Vera's mind, a war was being fought. The pain screamed for attention. But beneath the pain, something else was rising. Something hot, something ancient, something that had been forged in the fires of 11 deployments and countless moments when death had come so close she could feel its breath on her skin. Rage, pure and absolute and utterly focused. Her body wanted to move, wanted to rise, wanted to show this pathetic excuse for a soldier what a real warrior could do. She could end him, right here, right now. 3 seconds was all she would need. 1 to gain her feet, 1 to close the distance, 1 to put him on the ground in a way that would require surgical intervention to repair. The training was there. The capability was there. The justification was there. 20 years of combat experience told her exactly how to disable a man of his size. The throat strike that would collapse his windpipe. The knee destruction that would leave him crippled. The temple blow that would shut down his nervous system like flipping a switch. She could feel the movements in her muscles, the phantom execution of techniques she had used in situations where hesitation meant death. But the word cut through the rage like a blade. But Claire's face appeared in her mind, smiling in the desert, arms around Vera's shoulders. Believing that her friend would keep the promise she had made, and Lily, 21 years old, preparing to follow in her mother's footsteps, trusting that Aunt Vera would finish what she had started, and the other victims, names in a file, soldiers whose careers had been damaged or destroyed by this man, whose testimonies would be worthless if Vera lost control now. If she attacked Holt, she would be the aggressor. The case would collapse. The evidence would be explained away, and he would win. He would continue. More soldiers would suffer. More careers would end. More families would pay the price for one man's insecurity. The rage did not disappear, but Vera placed it in a box, a steel box with walls thick enough to contain a nuclear explosion. She would open that box later, when the time was right, when the evidence was complete. When justice could be served properly instead of squandered in a moment of justified fury. She moved, not with her hands, not struggling to her knees. She simply stood, in one fluid motion, as if gravity had reversed itself and pulled her upright. Her face was flushed red from pressure and lack of oxygen. A thin line of blood trickled from her left nostril where the impact with the mat had been hardest, but she stood at attention. Her hands came up. 2 precise pats, left shoulder, right shoulder, removing invisible dust from fabric that was already immaculate. The gesture was mechanical, precise, utterly emotionless. Then she looked at Captain Garrett Holt. Her eyes held all the warmth of the North Atlantic in February. Gray-blue, depthless, empty. "Is the demonstration complete, Captain?" Her voice was flat, professional. The tone had not changed from any other question she had asked during the training. There was no anger in it, no pain, no fear. Just a simple question posed in the same manner someone might ask about the weather forecast. The effect on Holt was immediate and visceral. He had been expecting tears, anger, some kind of emotional reaction that would justify his actions, that would allow him to frame her response as weakness, as proof that women did not belong in combat roles. Instead, she had given him nothing, not a single crack in the facade, not a single indication that what he had just done had affected her in any way whatsoever. It was unnerving. Her complete lack of reaction suggested either inhuman self-control or the kind of psychological conditioning that came from experiences far more traumatic than anything Holt could imagine inflicting. And for the first time since she had arrived at Fort Bragg, something flickered in Holt's eyes that looked almost like fear. "Get out of my sight." His voice was tight with frustration. "Go clean yourself up. You're bleeding on my training mat." Vera touched her upper lip, saw the blood on her fingers, nodded once. "Yes, sir." She walked toward the barracks with the same measured stride she had used all day. No limping, no rubbing her neck where the crushing pressure had been applied. No indication whatsoever that she had just been subjected to what any reasonable person would classify as assault. The moment she was out of sight, Staff Sergeant Holloway's control shattered. What the hell was that? His voice was low but furious. He had moved to stand directly in front of Holt, his body language suggesting he was very close to doing something that would end his career. "Sir, that wasn't a demonstration. That was realistic training, Sergeant," Holt interrupted. His face was still red, but now it was the red of anger rather than exertion. "Something you'd understand if you'd spent less time holding hands with enemy prisoners and more time learning how to break them." He stepped closer to Holloway. "This is how combat works. It's not gentle. It's not fair. And if she can't handle a controlled demonstration, she has no business being here." "Controlled?" Another ranger spoke up, a younger specialist named Webb. "Sir, you could have broken her neck. The pressure you applied." "Are you questioning my judgment, specialist?" Webb went quiet. The threat in Holt's voice was unmistakable. "Question this instructor and face consequences that would follow you for the rest of your career." "I didn't think so." Holt's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who had successfully established dominance through intimidation. "Now everyone drop and give me 50 push-ups for wasting my time with complaints. And while you're counting, think about whether you want to be warriors or daycare attendants." He paused. "Because in my course, we train warriors." The Rangers dropped to the mat and began their push-ups. Holloway held Holt's gaze for one more second before complying. His jaw clenched so tight it looked painful, but he complied, because the system demanded compliance. And because he understood that there were better ways to fight this battle than direct confrontation. That evening, Holloway sat in his quarters with a secure phone pressed to his ear. On the other end of the line was Master Chief Elias Croft, 52 years old, 28 years in the teams, a legend among legends. The kind of operator whose exploits were classified at levels that most people did not know existed. "The woman you're describing," Croft's voice was calm, measured, the voice of someone who never raised it because he never needed to. "She's one of ours." Holloway exhaled slowly. "I suspected as much, Master Chief. The way she moves, the way she processed that assault without breaking composure, that's not standard training." "No, it's not." A pause. "Her name is Vera Sinclair, Lieutenant Commander, DevGru, 20 years of service, 11 deployments, Navy Cross, and approximately 15 other decorations that you don't have the clearance to know about. Holloway's grip tightened on the phone. Then what the hell is she doing here? Why is she letting that bastard— Because that's the mission, Sergeant. Croft's voice hardened. She volunteered for this. She's building a case against Holt that will end his career and potentially send him to Leavenworth. Every time he touches her, he's adding another nail to his own coffin. And if he kills her in the process? Silence. Then Croft spoke again. Vera Sinclair has survived things that would give you nightmares for the rest of your life. She's made a calculated decision that the risk is worth the outcome. Our job is to respect that decision. So what do? You watch. You document. And unless her life is in immediate danger, you do not intervene. Holloway closed his eyes. That's a hard order, Master Chief. Most of the important ones are, Sergeant. Croft out. The line went dead. Holloway sat in the darkness for a long time, thinking about the woman who had taken a knee to the skull and risen like nothing had happened, thinking about the look in her eyes, that terrible emptiness, thinking about the kind of purpose that would drive someone to endure that level of abuse voluntarily, and thinking about what the next 48 hours might bring. In her barracks room, Vera Sinclair sat on the edge of her bed and cataloged her injuries. The bruising on her neck was significant, purple and black spreading from the base of her skull down toward her shoulder blades. Her ribs ached with each breath. The cut above her eyebrow had opened again during the assault and required fresh bandaging. She photographed everything, every bruise, every mark, every piece of evidence that would eventually bury Garrett Holt. Then she pulled out her rifle, the HK-416 that had been her constant companion through 11 deployments. She disassembled it with practiced ease: barrel, bolt carrier, trigger assembly, each component separated and laid out in precise order. She cleaned each piece with methodical thoroughness, oil applied in measured amounts, surfaces wiped until they gleamed, everything reassembled with the care of someone performing a sacred ritual. This was meditation for warriors, the repetitive motions that allowed the mind to process while the hands stayed busy. She thought about tomorrow, day 4, the final exercise, the culminating event that would determine whether her mission succeeded or failed, and she made a decision. When she loaded her magazines, she counted rounds, 14 per magazine, not 19, a deliberate handicap. Because when she demonstrated what she could do, there would be those who tried to explain it away. Lucky conditions, inferior opposition, equipment advantages. By limiting herself, she would remove those excuses. She would prove beyond any doubt that what she accomplished came from skill alone, from thousands of hours of training, from a lifetime of dedication, from the kind of mastery that could not be faked or excused. She set the loaded magazines in their pouches, and she pulled out Claire's photograph, 2 women in the desert, arms around each other, grinning at impossible odds. Tomorrow, she whispered. Tomorrow he learns what it means to face someone he can't break. She propped the photograph against her rifle, a reminder of why she was here, a promise waiting to be fulfilled. Then she lay back on the thin mattress and closed her eyes. Sleep came slowly, but it came, because warriors understand that rest is a weapon, and tomorrow she would need every weapon in her arsenal. The morning of day 4 arrived with a stillness that felt like the world holding its breath. Vera woke at 400, dressed in silence, arrived at the briefing room at 5:30. The 12 Rangers were already assembled when she entered. They looked at her differently now. 3 days of watching her endure abuse that would have broken most soldiers had earned something. Not friendship, not acceptance, but respect. The grudging acknowledgement that whatever she was not weak. Captain Garrett Holt entered at 600, flanked by his assistant instructors. His face showed the satisfaction of a man who believed he had already won. "Gentlemen," he addressed the room without looking at Vera. Today is your final test. Everything you've learned over the past 2 weeks culminates in this exercise. He gestured to a large monitor displaying a three-dimensional schematic. Kill House 4, full-scale hostage rescue simulation. The Rangers leaned forward, studying the layout with professional intensity. 12 rooms, 3 floors, multiple fatal funnels and choke points, 11 hostile role players armed with simunition rounds, 4 civilian role players as hostages. He paused for effect. Average completion time for this scenario is 4 minutes and 23 seconds. Another pause. The facility record is held by a Delta Force team of 6 operators who completed it in 2 minutes and 47 seconds. His eyes finally found Vera. That's the standard you're chasing. He turned to his tablet, scrolling with deliberate slowness. Now, team assignments. Bravo team will run first, followed by Charlie team. His finger stopped. For Alpha team, I need someone on point. The point position in a breach was the most dangerous and demanding role. First through every door, first to encounter every threat, first to make the split-second decisions that determined life or death. Most instructors assigned their best operators to point. Holt had other plans. Lieutenant Commander Sinclair. His voice carried false professionalism. Your Alpha team point. Let's see what the Navy taught you about being at the sharp end of the spear. The room went silent. Every Ranger understood what had just happened. This was not an assignment. It was a setup. Holt was putting Vera in a position where failure was almost guaranteed, and that failure would be public, recorded, used as evidence that women did not belong in combat roles. Vera stood. Understood, Captain. She paused. I have one request. Holt's smile widened. Here it comes, his expression said. The excuse, the plea for a different assignment, the admission that she was not ready. What's that? Permission to run the course solo, no team. The words hung in the air like smoke from a detonated charge. The Rangers stared. The assistant instructors exchanged glances. Even Holt's smile faltered for a moment. Solo? He made the word sound absurd. You want to run a 12-room hostage rescue scenario designed for a 6-man team by yourself? Yes, sir. Holt laughed. It was genuine, delighted. This was better than he had planned. She was not just going to fail. She was going to fail so catastrophically that it would become legendary. Granted, his voice dripped with anticipation. You want to embarrass yourself alone? Be my guest. Course starts at 800. Don't be late. He dismissed the briefing. The Rangers filed out. Several glanced back at Vera with expressions that ranged from pity to morbid curiosity. Holloway lingered at the door. His eyes met hers. She gave him a slight nod, a gesture that said more than words ever could. I know what I am doing. Trust me. He nodded back and left. At 007:50, Vera stood in the staging area outside Kill House 4. The structure loomed before her, 3 stories of concrete and steel and carefully orchestrated violence. She had memorized the schematic during the briefing, every room layout, every door position, every likely hostile placement. She had built a 3-dimensional map in her mind, the kind of mental architecture that allowed operators to navigate complex environments without conscious thought. But she knew something else, something the schematic did not show. In the observation booth 3 stories above, Colonel Warren Drake stood surrounded by brass. 3 generals had arrived overnight, traveling under security protocols that suggested their presence was both important and classified. General Mitchell, 3 stars, 28 years in special operations, the kind of officer whose opinion could make or break careers. Colonel. Mitchell's voice was quiet. I've reviewed the footage from the past 3 days. What Holt did to her yesterday was grounds for court-martial. Why didn't you intervene? Because she asked me not to, sir. Drake pulled up a secure message on his tablet. This came through encrypted channels 18 hours ago. The message was brief. Do not intervene regardless of circumstances. Need him to commit fully before revelation. Trust me. Mitchell read it twice. She endured that deliberately, to build an airtight case. Yes, sir, and in approximately 10 minutes she's going to demonstrate exactly what Captain Holt has been trying to break. Drake's expression was grim. What you're about to see isn't standard training. It's going to look impossible. But I've reviewed her classified service record. What she's planning is well within her documented capabilities. Mitchell nodded slowly. DevGru? Yes, sir. Tier 1. 20 years of service. From a 21-year-old ensign fresh out of the Naval Academy to the 41-year-old legend standing down there now. The Navy Cross and enough classified operations to fill a filing cabinet. And Holt doesn't know? Holt has no idea. He sees a woman, a small woman, an outsider. He sees everything his ego needs him to see. Mitchell turned to watch the monitor. Then let's see what happens when reality contradicts his expectations. At 0755, Captain Garrett Holt arrived at the observation booth. He settled into a chair with the satisfied air of someone about to watch entertainment he had been anticipating. This should be interesting. His voice carried amusement. I give her 30 seconds before she's overwhelmed. No one responded. On the monitor, Vera Sinclair stood in the staging area, perfectly still, her breathing controlled, her focus absolute. She looked like a statue carved from marble, beautiful, cold, utterly unmoved by the world around her. At 800 precisely, Holt's voice crackled over the loudspeaker. Kill House 4 is live. 11 hostile role players in position, 4 civilian hostages. Your mission is to rescue the hostages and neutralize all threats. He paused. Ready, Sinclair? Try not to embarrass the Navy too badly. Vera's response came back calm and measured. Captain, what's the facility record again? Holt's smile widened. 2 minutes, 47 seconds. Delta Force. 6 operators. He leaned back in his chair. Why do you ask? Just curious, sir. Ready to begin. The breacher moved forward, placed the explosive charge on the door. The countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The explosion shattered the morning silence, and Vera Sinclair stepped through the smoke, into history. The explosion was a thunderclap that shook the world. The heavy steel door buckled inward. Smoke poured from its mangled frame in a thick gray cloud that obscured everything beyond the threshold. Standard protocol dictated waiting for the smoke to clear before entry. Visibility was crucial. Moving through smoke was how operators got killed by friendly fire or walked into ambushes they could not see coming. Every training manual in existence emphasized this point. Every instructor hammered it into their students. Wait for the smoke, assess the situation, then move. Vera Sinclair did not wait. She passed through the doorway before the smoke had even begun to dissipate, a ghost slipping through the veil between worlds, her body low, her rifle up, her eyes seeing through methods that had nothing to do with visible light. Thermal differential, the technique that DevGru operators spent months mastering and most never fully achieved. The ability to sense heat signatures through smoke and darkness, to feel the presence of bodies in space through minute temperature variations, to navigate blind and still know exactly where every threat was positioned. Vera had mastered it 15 years ago, in the mountains of Afghanistan where visibility meant death, in the compounds of Iraq where smoke grenades were as common as bullets. In training facilities where the instructors had pushed her beyond every limit she thought she had. The first hostel was positioned just inside the door, in the fatal funnel, the kill zone where entry teams were most vulnerable. He had his rifle raised and ready, tracking the doorway, waiting for targets to present themselves through the clearing smoke. He never fired a shot. 2 red paint splatters appeared on his chest, a grouping tight enough to cover with a playing card, a perfect double tap delivered through smoke so thick that most operators could not have seen their own hands. The hostel's mouth opened in surprise. But before he could process what had happened, Vera was already past him, flowing into the first room like water, finding its path through stone. In the observation booth, every person was standing now, pressed against the glass or staring at monitors in stunned disbelief. Jesus Christ! Lieutenant Harris's whisper cut through the silence. She entered through the smoke. How did she see? She didn't see. Colonel Drake's voice was steady, the voice of a man who understood what he was witnessing, even if others did not. She memorized the layout from the briefing and used thermal differential to navigate. That's an advanced DevGru technique. Most operators never master it. On the monitor, Vera was moving through the kill house with a speed that seemed to defy physics. The second hostile had positioned himself around a corner in the hallway, standard ambush position. He began to peer around the edge, weapon rising, eyes searching for the target he had been told would be easy prey. Before he could acquire anything, 2 more red splatters appeared on his helmet. The paint splashed across his face shield. He dropped to his knees in the universal signal that he was out of the fight. Vera cleared the corner without breaking stride, her rifle up, her movements impossibly fluid. She was not running, she was flowing, each motion transitioning seamlessly into the next like a dancer who had rehearsed the choreography 10,000 times until it became something beyond conscious thought. Room 2 contained 2 hostiles using a desk for cover. Standard doctrine dictated engaging from the doorway, using the frame for concealment while suppressing the enemy position, calling for backup, working as a team to eliminate the threat. Vera did not have a team. She did not follow standard doctrine. She rolled right immediately after crossing the threshold, coming at the hostiles from an oblique angle they had not anticipated, moving so fast that their eyes could not track her position. 4 shots. Pop, 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 pop. Both hostiles went down before they had finished turning to face the threat. The timer on the main display read 8 seconds. This isn't possible. Captain Garrett Holt's voice had lost its smugness. His tablet showed Vera's movement path as a glowing blue line cutting through the kill house with geometric precision. No hesitations, no backtracking, no wasted motion. It was a straight line from entry to objective, as if she could see through walls, as if she knew where every hostile would be before she encountered them. It's very possible, Captain. General Mitchell's voice carried the weight of someone who had commanded Special Operations Forces for 2 decades and recognized mastery when he saw it. She's not clearing rooms, she's dissecting them. That's the difference between good and exceptional. Room 3 fell in 2 seconds. A single hostile caught mid-transition between cover positions. 2 rounds center mass before his rifle could come up. Room 4 took 3 seconds. 2 hostiles in elevated positions, one on a catwalk, one behind a reinforced window. Vera engaged them simultaneously, splitting her fire between targets with a precision that suggested she had 2 separate aiming systems in her brain. Both went down. Neither got off a shot. The timer read 18 seconds. 18 seconds for 4 rooms. 18 seconds to neutralize 6 hostile combatants. 18 seconds that rewrote everything the observers thought they knew about what was possible. Room 5 presented the first real challenge. The scenario designers had placed it specifically to test operator judgment under stress. 2 hostile role players, 3 civilian role players. One of the hostiles was using a petite female civilian as a human shield. A simulated pistol pressed to her head, partial concealment behind a door frame. Low light conditions from blown bulbs that had been deliberately arranged, 23 feet of distance. Standard protocol dictated negotiation or waiting for sniper support. Taking the shot was considered too risky. The margin for error was microscopic. A miss would kill the hostage. Even a near miss might cause the hostile to reflexively pull the trigger. Every training manual said the same thing. Do not take this shot. Vera entered the room, assessed the situation in the time it takes to blink, and made her decision. She shifted her rifle to her left hand, her non-dominant hand, because the angle was better from that side. 23 feet, one hostile with partial concealment, one hostage with a gun to her head. Heart rate elevated from combat stress, adrenaline flooding her system, every factor working against accuracy. She fired once. The paint splatter appeared on the hostile's forehead, a perfect circle of red that marked the instant shutdown zone. The T-box shot, the most difficult precision technique in close-quarters combat, targeting the medulla oblongata, the brainstem, the off switch that controlled all motor function. A hit there meant instant neural shutdown, no reflexive trigger pull, no death spasm. Just immediate and total cessation of all movement. The hostile's head snapped back. The civilian role player remained untouched, frozen in shock at what she had just witnessed. In the observation booth, the silence was absolute. General Mitchell's mouth had actually fallen open. Lieutenant Harris had stopped taking notes, his pen hovering above his tablet as his brain struggled to process what his eyes had just seen. Did she just... One of the other generals began to speak but could not finish. Left-handed precision shot under stress at 23 feet. Colonel Drake confirmed what they had all witnessed. Targeting the medulla oblongata for instant neural shutdown. He paused. That's not luck, gentlemen. That's thousands of hours of training in scenarios most of us can't imagine. On Holt's tablet, a system alert flashed. He stared at it, his face draining of color like water from a broken vessel. The rifle sensors are showing she only loaded 14 rounds per magazine. His voice was hollow. She handicapped herself. Why would she do that? Lieutenant Harris asked the question everyone was thinking. To prove a point. Drake's voice carried grim satisfaction. To ensure no one could claim she succeeded because of equipment advantage or ideal conditions. She's building a case so airtight that even the most dedicated skeptic couldn't poke holes in it. Vera continued her assault through the remaining rooms. Each one presented challenges designed to slow down and frustrate even elite operators. Hostiles in elevated positions, ambush points with overlapping fields of fire, civilians scattered throughout to force target discrimination, environmental factors like low light and acoustic confusion. She moved through them all like smoke through a screen door. 32 seconds, 35, 38, 40. The hostile role players had been briefed that they were facing a standard Navy participant, someone who would be good but beatable, someone who would follow predictable patterns and make exploitable mistakes. They were not prepared for what they encountered. Later, during the debrief, they would describe the experience in terms that bordered on supernatural. We never saw her coming. She moved like she wasn't human. I heard a sound, started to turn, and there was paint on my chest before I finished the movement. Fighting her was like fighting smoke. You couldn't grab onto anything. You couldn't predict anything. You just waited to get hit. One sergeant, a veteran of 15 years in special operations training, put it most succinctly. I've role-played against Delta, against SEAL Team 6, against units whose names I'm not allowed to say. I've never seen anything like her, not even close. Room 11 fell at 41 seconds. 3 hostiles in a coordinated defensive position, the kind of setup that was supposed to require multiple entry points and suppressive fire. Vera cleared it alone in 4 seconds. Her movement through the room was a ballet of violence, each position taken for maximum coverage, each shot delivered at the precise moment of maximum vulnerability, each transition executed with the fluid grace of someone for whom combat had become as natural as breathing. The timer read 45 seconds as she approached the final room, room 12. The scenario called for one hostile, one final challenge, but Vera knew something the schematic did not show. She paused at the doorway, not from exhaustion, not from fear. She paused because she heard something. A sound so faint that most humans would not have registered it as anything more than building noise. The subtle rhythm of controlled breathing coming from above, from the ceiling tiles. Someone was up there. someone who was not on the floor plan, someone who had positioned themselves in a location that no standard operator would think to check. Vera smiled. For the first time in 3 days, something like genuine emotion crossed her face. She knew who was up there. She had recognized that breathing pattern anywhere, the same pattern she had heard during her first deployment. When a legend had talked her through a firefight that should have killed her, when steady words in her earpiece had kept her focused while the world exploded around her, Master Chief Elias Croft, her mentor, her teacher, the man who had transformed her from a talented young officer into something extraordinary over 20 years of guidance and hard lessons, he had come to test her one final time. Vera entered the room. Her rifle swept the visible space, clearing the corners, checking the obvious positions. The room appeared empty. A civilian role player sat bound to a chair in the center. The hostage, the objective. But Vera did not move toward her. Instead, she stopped, closed her eyes, and listened. The breathing was controlled but not silent, micro movements as muscles adjusted to maintain position. The faint creak of ceiling tiles bearing weight they were not designed to support. Sound triangulation, another DevGru technique that required years to master, the ability to pinpoint location through acoustic signature alone. Vera calculated the angle, the distance, the position. Then she raised her rifle toward the ceiling and fired. The shot punched through the tile with a puff of dust and debris. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a body dropped from above. A large man in full tactical gear. Paint splattered across his face shield in a perfect center mass hit. He hit the ground in a controlled roll and came up grinning. "That's my girl!" Master Chief Elias Croft pulled off his helmet. 52 years old, iron gray hair cropped close. A face that looked like it had been carved from granite and seasoned by decades of operations in places that did not officially exist. His eyes held the pride of a teacher who had just watched his finest student exceed every expectation. Acoustic triangulation through ceiling tiles, shot placement based entirely on sound signature, perfect execution under combat stress. He shook his head in admiration. "I taught you well, Sinclair." Vera lowered her rifle. "You taught me everything, Master Chief." The all-clear tone blared through the facility. The timer froze. 47 seconds. The observation booth erupted, not in cheers, not in applause, in stunned silence that gradually gave way to the murmur of voices trying to process what they had witnessed. 47 seconds. To complete a mission designed for a 6-man team operating over 4 minutes, 47 seconds. To neutralize 11 hostiles, rescue 4 hostages, and navigate a complex 3-story structure with 0 mistakes, 0 civilian casualties, 100% accuracy on 14 shots. The facility record of 2 minutes and 47 seconds had not just been broken. It had been demolished so thoroughly that the previous record now looked like it had been set by amateurs. General Mitchell turned to Colonel Drake. His face showed the kind of awe that experienced warriors reserve for moments that redefine their understanding of what is possible. "Colonel, in my 35 years in special operations, I have never witnessed anything like what I just saw." He paused. "That wasn't training. That was art." The other generals were nodding, their expressions mirroring Mitchell's combination of disbelief and admiration. Even the junior officers and enlisted technical staff stood staring at the monitors, as if they had just witnessed something that would take years to fully comprehend. Only one person in the observation booth seemed unable to process what had happened. Captain Garrett Holt sat frozen in his chair. His tablet had slipped from his fingers and lay on the floor. His face had gone from red to white to a shade of gray that suggested his cardiovascular system was struggling to maintain basic function. The sensors malfunctioned. His voice came out as a whisper. "That's the only explanation. Run the diagnostics. Check the timing system." He looked around the booth with desperate eyes. "This isn't possible." No one can clear 12 rooms in 47 seconds. No one. The sensors are working perfectly, Captain. Lieutenant Harris's voice was quiet but firm. I've run diagnostics 3 times. Every system confirms the result. Holt stood abruptly. His chair screeched against the floor. I'm going down there. I need to see this for myself. I need to... Captain. Colonel Drake's voice stopped him mid-stride. Before you go, there's something you need to know. He nodded to Harris. Pull up the file. The main display flickered, and Vera Sinclair's real service record filled the screen. Not the sanitized version that had been provided for her cover role, the actual classified file that detailed her true history. Holt's eyes scanned the text. His face transitioned through a spectrum of emotions: confusion, disbelief, growing horror. Unit assignment, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, DevGru SEAL Team 6, the most elite special operations unit in the United States military, 20 years of service. From a 21-year-old ensign fresh out of the Naval Academy to the 41-year-old legend who stood before them now. 11 combat deployments, Afghanistan 7 times, Iraq 3 times, Horn of Africa once, plus 5 additional deployments to locations classified above top secret, primary military occupational specialty, special operations officer, lead breacher qualified, master training specialist in close quarters combat. Additional qualifications: high altitude, low opening parachutist, combat diver, advanced sniper, survival evasion, resistance escape instructor. The decorations section read like a greatest hits compilation of American military valor. Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters. Bronze Star with V device and 3 oak leaf clusters. Silver Star with 2 oak leaf clusters. And at the bottom, highlighted in red because of its significance, the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor that the Navy could bestow. The citation was partially redacted for security reasons, but what remained was damning. For extraordinary heroism during combat operations in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, Lieutenant Commander Sinclair single-handedly held off an enemy force of more than 60 insurgents for 4 hours while directing the evacuation of 22 wounded SEALs. Despite sustaining 3 gunshot wounds, she maintained her position until all personnel were extracted. Her actions prevented the loss of American lives and demonstrated the highest traditions of military service. Holt's hands were shaking. The tablet slipped from his fingers again, clattered to the floor. She's DevGru. She's Team 6. Yes. Drake's voice was cold enough to frost glass. The woman you spent 3 days trying to break is one of the most decorated and combat-proven special operators in the entire United States military. He stepped closer to Holt. The woman you drove your knee into yesterday with enough force to potentially cause permanent spinal injury has a Navy Cross for holding off 60 insurgents while wounded. Another step. The woman you called sweetheart and Navy princess has forgotten more about close quarters combat than you will ever know. Holt's legs gave out. He collapsed back into his chair, his face ashen, his world crumbling around him. I didn't know. The words came out broken. How was I supposed to know? You weren't supposed to know. General Mitchell's voice cut through the room like a blade. You were supposed to evaluate her based on her performance, which, if you'd been paying attention instead of running your mouth, would have made it obvious she was operating on a completely different level than everyone else in your course. The observation booth door opened. Vera Sinclair stepped inside. Her rifle was still slung across her chest. Her face showed no expression beyond professional calm. She had removed her tactical helmet, and the bruising on her neck was visible now, purple and yellow and black against her skin, evidence of the abuse she had endured, evidence of the price she had paid. She walked directly to where Holt sat. For a moment, she simply looked at him. Her eyes held all the cold judgment of the winter Atlantic, gray-blue, depthless, empty of mercy. Captain Holt. Her voice was quiet but carried through the silent room with perfect clarity. 17 years ago, you were an instructor at Ranger School. One of your students was Lieutenant Claire Ashford. She paused. Do you remember her? Holt's face was blank, his mind searching desperately through years of students he had trained, names he had forgotten, faces that had blurred into anonymity. I don't... You hazed her brutally, multiple injuries that she never reported because she wanted to graduate. She wanted to serve her country more than she wanted to protect herself from you. Vera's voice remained level, but beneath the surface, something ancient and cold was stirring. One of those injuries was chronic damage to her L4 and L5 vertebrae, damage that never fully healed, damage that would send pain signals through her nervous system at unpredictable moments for the rest of her life. She reached into her pocket, pulled out the worn photograph. Two women in desert camouflage, arms around each other, grinning at the camera. She placed it on the console in front of Holt. In 2009, during combat operations in Ramadi, that old injury caused Claire to hesitate for 0.4 of a second during a building clearance. Her voice did not waver. In that 0.4 of a second, an enemy combatant shot her through the throat. She died in my arms. It took 43 seconds. 43 seconds of her choking on her own blood while I tried to keep her alive. She tapped the photograph. Claire Ashford saved my life in Fallujah. She taught me what it meant to be a leader. She showed me that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision that something else is more important. Her eyes locked onto Holt's. When she died, her daughter was 6 years old. I went to that funeral. I held that little girl while she cried and asked why her mommy wasn't coming home. She straightened. I promised her that her mother's death would mean something, that I would find out why Claire hesitated, that when I found the reason, I would make sure it never happened to anyone else. Holt was crying now, silent tears tracking down his face, the tears of a man watching his carefully constructed self-image collapse into rubble. I didn't remember her. That's the problem, Captain. Vera's voice remained level, but there was an edge to it now, sharp enough to cut through steel. You never do. You break people and move on without a second thought. You tell yourself it's for their own good, that you're making them stronger, that the system requires sacrifice. She shook her head. But you're not making anyone stronger. You're just feeding your own ego, compensating for your own failures, taking out your frustration on people who can't fight back. She paused. You failed SEAL selection twice. You watched a SEAL team accomplish in 12 minutes what your entire company couldn't do in 6 hours during Desert Storm. And instead of learning from that humiliation, you let it poison you. Holt flinched as if she had struck him. You turned your failure into cruelty, your inadequacy into abuse, and Claire Ashford paid the price with her life. She gestured to the screen displaying her service record. I could have ended you on that mat yesterday. 3 seconds. That's all it would have taken. But I chose to endure 3 days of your abuse because that was the only way to build a case that couldn't be dismissed, the only way to ensure you would never hurt another soldier again. I'm sorry. The words came out as a sob. I'm so sorry. Your apology means nothing to Claire Ashford. Vera's voice was ice. It means nothing to her daughter Lily. It means nothing to the soldiers whose careers you damaged or destroyed. It means nothing to the families who suffered because of your cruelty. She stepped back. The only thing that matters now is that you can't hurt anyone else. Colonel Drake moved forward, his face set in granite. Captain Garrett Holt, you are hereby relieved of your instructor duties, pending investigation into multiple violations of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. He gestured toward the door. Military police are waiting outside to escort you to confinement. You will be formally charged with Article 93, cruelty and maltreatment, as well as Article 92, dereliction of duty. 2 MPs entered the observation booth. They moved to either side of Holt. helped him to his feet with professional courtesy that their faces suggested they did not feel. As they led him toward the door, Holt looked back at Vera one final time. "I'm sorry." He said it again, as if repetition could somehow make it mean something. "I'm truly sorry." Vera met his gaze. "You're sorry you got caught, Captain. That's not the same thing as being sorry for what you did." The MPs escorted Holt out. The door closed behind them with a sound like a coffin lid sealing. For a long moment, nobody in the observation booth spoke. The weight of what had just transpired hung in the air like smoke after a battle. General Mitchell was the first to break the silence. He walked to where Vera stood, came to attention, and saluted. A 3-star general saluting a lieutenant commander, because rank meant nothing in the face of the kind of courage and sacrifice he had just witnessed. "Commander Sinclair." His voice carried the formality of official recognition. "On behalf of the United States military, I apologize for what you endured. What we witnessed today wasn't just the finest display of close-quarters combat proficiency I've seen in my career." He paused. "It was a demonstration of moral courage that few possess. You sacrificed yourself to protect others. That is the definition of heroism." Vera returned the salute. "Thank you, sir. But I didn't do this for recognition. I did it because it needed to be done." Mitchell lowered his hand. "Which is exactly why you're the kind of warrior this country needs." He turned to address the room. "What happened here today becomes the foundation for new policy. Training protocols will be revised, instructor oversight will be enhanced, and anyone who believes they can abuse their authority in the name of toughness will learn very quickly that the military no longer tolerates that behavior." He looked back at Vera. "The 47-second record you set today will stand as testament to what's possible when talent meets dedication. But more importantly, your willingness to endure abuse to protect others will become a teaching case for every leadership course in the military." His voice softened. "Your story will save lives, Commander. Maybe not in combat, but in training facilities where the next generation is learning what it means to serve." Vera nodded once. "That's all I wanted, sir, for it to mean something." The observation booth gradually emptied, officers returning to their duties, each one stopping to shake Vera's hand or offer words of respect before leaving. Soon only Colonel Warren Drake remained, standing with her at the window that overlooked Kill House 4, the structure where she had just rewritten the record books, where she had just completed a mission 15 years in the making. "You could have revealed your identity on day 1. Drake's voice was quiet. "You could have ended this before it started." "Then he would have hidden who he really is," Vera replied, her eyes still fixed on the kill house below. "He would have been careful, political. He would have continued abusing soldiers in ways that couldn't be documented." She turned to face Drake. "This way." He showed his true nature. "The evidence is undeniable, and every instructor who watches that footage will think twice before they let their ego override their judgment." Drake nodded slowly. "Claire Ashford, her daughter. You're still carrying that weight." "I'll always carry it, sir." Vera's voice held something that might have been acceptance, might have been peace. "That's what we do. We carry the ones we couldn't save forward, and we try to make sure their loss prevents future losses." She paused. "Claire's daughter is named Lily. She's 21 now, smart, determined, wants to follow in her mother's footsteps." Her eyes went distant. "I write to her every year, birthday cards, graduation messages, trying to fill some of the emptiness that Claire left behind." "You're a good person, Commander." Drake's voice carried genuine respect. "The military needs more like you." Vera smiled slightly. "The military needs fewer people like Holt, sir. I'm just doing my part to make that happen." She collected her gear, walked toward the door, paused with her hand on the frame. "Colonel, thank you for your role in this. I know it wasn't easy to watch and not intervene." Drake met her eyes. Mogadishu taught me that sometimes you have to let bad things happen in the short term to prevent worse things in the long term. It's never easy, but it's necessary. He paused. What you did these past 3 days took more courage than most combat operations. Don't let anyone tell you different. Vera nodded and left. 3 years later, spring 2027. The Joint Urban Warfare Training Center had changed in small ways and large. New kill houses had been built. Training protocols had evolved. Instructor oversight had been completely restructured. But Kill House 4 remained the same, a monument to the day everything shifted. And mounted on the wall beside its entrance, a brass plaque gleamed in the morning sun. The Sinclair Standard, 47 seconds. Perfection is process, not performance. Assume nothing. A young woman stood before that plaque on a spring morning. She was 24 years old, blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun, blue eyes that held the same impossible combination of kindness and steel that her mother had possessed. Lieutenant Lily Ashford, United States Navy. She wore dress whites that bore a single pin above her left breast, the seal trident, the symbol that marked her as one of the most elite warriors in the world. She had earned it 6 months ago, the first day of the rest of her life, the culmination of a dream that had begun at a funeral 18 years before. When a little girl had cried and asked why her mommy was not coming home, she reached out, traced the engraved letters with her fingertip. Lieutenant Commander Vera Sinclair. The Sinclair Standard. She had read about this day in the official reports, watched the footage that had been used in leadership training courses across all service branches. But standing here, in the place where it had happened, felt different, more real, more present. Your class starts in 20 minutes, Lieutenant. The voice came from behind her. Lily turned to find a woman approaching across the concrete, 44 years old now, still carrying herself with that predator stillness that marked special operations veterans, still moving with the fluid economy of motion that came from decades of training. Commander Vera Sinclair, senior instructor at the facility now, passing on the skills that had made her legendary to a new generation of warriors. "Ma'am," Lily came to attention. "At ease." Vera walked forward to stand beside her, both of them looking at the plaque. "You know, every time I see this, I think about your mother." Her voice was soft. "About that day in Fallujah when she taught me to breathe through panic. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds hold, 4 seconds out, 4 seconds hold." She smiled. "I still use it, every day." Lily's eyes glistened, but she held herself together, the way her mother would have. "Commander, I need to ask you something I've wondered about for years." "Go ahead." "Was it worth it? 3 days of abuse, the pain, the risk of permanent injury." She paused. "Was breaking Holt worth what you endured?" Vera turned to face her fully. Her gray-blue eyes held the depth of someone who had seen things that could not be unseen, done things that could not be undone, and found peace with all of it. "Your mother died because chronic pain from training injuries made her hesitate for 4/10 of a second. In those 4/10 of a second, I lost the finest officer I ever served with." Her voice was steady. "You lost your mother." She paused. "Since that day in 2024, not a single female operator has reported training abuse at this facility. 0. Across the entire special operations community, hazing complaints have dropped 73%. She gestured to the kill house. "So yes, Lily, it was worth every bruise. It was worth every moment of pain, because you're standing here wearing that trident without having to prove you deserve it through suffering." She placed a hand on Lily's shoulder. "You proved it through skill, through discipline, through dedication. That's what your mother would have wanted." Lily's composure finally cracked. A single tear traced down her cheek. "She'd be proud of you, Commander. She'd be proud of you, Lieutenant." Vera's voice carried warmth that she rarely showed. You earned that trident the right way, through competence and character. Claire would have been thrilled to see who you've become. She squeezed Lily's shoulder. Your class today is running Kill House 4. It's tradition for second-generation operators. She paused. You ready? Lily wiped her eyes, straightened her spine, and looked at the plaque one more time. Her mother's sacrifice, Vera's courage, her own journey from grieving child to elite warrior. 3 generations of women connected by pain, transformed into purpose. Yes, ma'am, I'm ready. 90 minutes later, Lieutenant Lily Ashford emerged from Kill House 4. Her completion time flashed on the display, 1 minute and 12 seconds, the second best time in facility history, behind only the record that still stood on the wall, the Sinclair standard, 47 seconds, a mark that might never be broken. Vera was waiting with a small wooden box. She handed it to Lily without ceremony. Inside was a brass casing from Lily's final shot, polished to a mirror shine, mounted on dark wood. The engraving read, Lieutenant Lily Ashford, 112, like mother, like mentor. The legacy continues. Lily held the plaque and finally let the tears come. Not tears of grief, but of completion, of connection, of promises kept across years and sacrifice. Vera pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace, the kind of embrace that warriors share, when words are not enough, when only contact can convey what the heart needs to say. Your mother saved my life in Fallujah. Vera's voice was rough. I promised I would honor that. Today, watching you complete this course, I know I kept that promise. Lily held on for a moment longer, then stepped back, wiped her eyes, and smiled. The same impossible smile her mother had worn in the desert 21 years ago. Thank you, Aunt Vera, for everything, for never giving up on her memory, for never giving up on me. Vera's eyes glistened, but she held herself together, the way warriors do. I'll see you at graduation, Lieutenant. Don't be late. Lily laughed, and for a moment Claire Ashford was there with them, in the sunshine, in the laughter, in the love that had survived death and time and distance. The plaque would join Vera's in the facility's Hall of Honor. 2 brass casings, 2 women, 2 records that would inspire generations of warriors to come. Vera Sinclair stood alone in front of Kill House 4 after everyone had left. The shadows lengthened around her. The silence pressed in. She pulled Claire's photograph from her pocket one final time. 2 young women in the desert, arms around each other, grinning at impossible odds. We did it, Claire. Her voice was barely a whisper. We kept the promise. Your daughter is one of us now, and she's going to be even better than we were. She pressed the photograph to her heart. Rest now, my friend. You've earned it. The sun set over Fort Bragg, painting the world in shades of gold and amber. And somewhere, in the place where warriors go when their battles are done, Claire Ashford smiled, because some promises are worth keeping. No matter what they cost, no matter how long they take, no matter what you have to endure along the way, the Sinclair standard, 47 seconds, a record that changed everything, and a legacy that would live forever.